The US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces (SDF), which consists mainly of members of various Kurdish armed groups, declared on October 31st that they had halted their operation against ISIS in the Euphrates Valley because of Turkish attacks on their positions in northern Syria. The SDF blamed Turkey for its own inability to eliminate the ISIS-held area of Hajin in the Euphrates Valley and called on the so-called international community to pressure Ankara to stop its strikes on SDF targets. The SDF also vowed to retaliate to attacks. On October the 30th, 31st and November the 1st, clashes between the Turkish military and units of the Kurdish People's Protection Units YPG were reported near the towns of Ain Arab, also known as Kobani, and Tel Abyad. According to pro-Turkish sources, at least 4 members of the YPG and the Kurdistan Workers' Party PKK were killed and 6 others were injured there. The YPG claimed that its members had destroyed a Turkish military truck with an anti-tank guided missile. As to the situation in the Hajin area, over the past few days ISIS units have achieved notable progress in clashes with the SDF, recapturing multiple positions from the US-backed group. The halt of the SDF operation there will likely contribute further to ISIS expansion in the direction of the Iraqi border. The SDF and the US-led coalition have for a long time ignored the ISIS-held pocket around Hajin because its elimination would remove the main formal pretext allowing Washington to keep its forces in the war-torn country. Now they bear the consequences of this approach. 33 soldiers of the Syrian Arab Army SAA were killed in clashes with ISIS in the area of Al-Safa in southeastern Syria, according to the terrorist group's news agency Amaq. Pro-government sources have not commented on this claim yet. Should this be true, this would be the second failed SAA attempt to advance in Al-Safa this week. The key issue behind the SAA setbacks in the area is that most of its elite forces are now deployed near the Idlib de-escalation zone, which is mostly controlled by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and other al-Qaeda-linked terrorist groups. So, by keeping a limited force in Al-Safa, the SAA is able to deter ISIS operations, but is not able to put an end to the ISIS presence there. Major General Igor Konashenkov, spokesman of the Russian Defense Ministry, revealed that Russian specialists are still training Syrian service members to use S-300 air defense systems. Russia also supplied the advanced Polyana D-4M automated command and control system to the Syrian Air Defense Forces. Such systems, which serve as an upper-level command post of air defense brigades and can handle up to 500 air targets, will be integrated into the air defense network created for the Syrian military.
Shalom. First and foremost, call Lord Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Harukakwadash. Double honors to the elder apostles of Great Millstone, and Shalom wa Brakatham to the Tabernacle of David. This is in from RT.com. All right, Russian bombers up in the sky for NATO Wargames stir up UK jets. All right, so this is a World War III update, and I'm gonna read a little bit of this article. Basically, you got the two countries. They both were, exercising, doing military drills, basically test firing their toys before they take them out to the field to take each other out, because that's prophesied in the scriptures. This is going to be that final world's war, and everything is leading to that moment. All right. And it's looking real close, man, for them to be doing these kind of drills right near each other, right side by side. And Russia is doing this to basically shake those NATO troops up, by sending those swarm bombers, right near their exercise, because they happen to be within one of their biggest drills that they've had in decades. All right, so basically, of course, Russia is sending a message to NATO. It says two Russian Tu-160 White Swan bombers are running drills in international waters off the coast of Norway, rattling NATO amid massive Trident Juncture 2018 war games on Russia's doorstep. Yeah, and they would, of course, Russia would have to take it to, this measure, because, you're right there, right at their doorstep. Y'all training to go to war with us right here at our doorstep. And we're gonna have to shake y'all up a little bit. Shit, we gonna have to, send some bombers like, hey, y'all a little close, man. So just know that we on alert and we watching. And matter of fact, we finna go right up in the midst of international waters between us, and we finna test fire some missiles, some rockets. So that's what's going on. And who knows, man? 'Cause the Most High, he's stirring things up, using his angels. All right, and the closer this thing get, go, the quicker we gonna get up out of here, man. We gonna be delivered from our Lord and Savior. All right, so I'm gonna keep reading. It says UK jets were scrambled in response, meaning they got a little shook up. They had to they had to hurry up and get some of their aircraft out the way, you know. So hey, who knows, man? They could bump heads, within this exercise, man. All right, but anyway, let me finish on, and then I'm gonna get a few scriptures. It says, long range strategic bombers are conducting planned exercises in the Barents Sea in the Sea of Norway, the Russian Defense Ministry said on Wednesday, prompting the UK to send air patrols to the north of Scotland in case of swans stray south. Russia filed a notice to airmen, NOTAM, of the exercise on Tuesday, saying that rocket test firings will be conducted in the Sea of Norway from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. GMT daily, November 1st through 3rd. The flights will take around 10 hours, after which the bombers will return to base, the Russian Defense Ministry said. All right, so basically, they're not too far from where NATO is trying to do their exercise at. So they're going to send those little bombers around while they're performing those rocket tests. All right, and it's really giving a warning to NATO for being on a doorstep with their exercise, man, because it poses what? A threat. Okay, so they flexing at each other right now, and they kind of shaking them up to send that message. So hey, man, this is is building up, man. Battle of Armageddon. All right, that's why all those troops are over there doing what they do, man. All right, they all testing them toys out before they take them out to the fields. All right, for that big final battle, that big final war. All right, it says the announcement has alarmed NATO, and some 50,000 troops are currently taking part in Trident Juncture 2018 exercises in Norway, also featuring 10,000 combat vehicles, 65 ships, and 250 aircraft. This is the biggest such drill in decades. All right, so I'm just we just being on alert, because the scriptures say, we're to watch as well as pray, measure the times diligently in itself, and basically this is how we know that we're in the end. All right, so this war is brewing off, man. All right, you got NATO, which is the beast system, the 7 heads with the 10 horns. That's NATO. Okay, and of course Magog, Russia is as the bear. Okay, and in this world's war they're gonna face off, and America rides NATO. All right, like it's the great whore that rides up on the high horse, so to speak, but she's riding up on a dragon. That's the beast, NATO and the EU. America is Babylon the Great, that great whore. All right, so this thing is getting close. Okay, and it's gonna the end result is these nations are gonna go to war. America's gonna get destroyed in the process. All right, some of these NATO countries are gonna get hit. Israel's gonna get devastated. Okay, but the Lord Himself, He's gonna come with the host of heaven, the angels, and all those nations that are over there fighting. He's gonna come and intervene, and He's gonna destroy them. All right, that's right. You could read that in Revelation 17, verse 14, Revelation 12 and 7, where it says, and there was a war in heaven, with Michael the archangel. That's going to be the Lord's angels, which is His army. It's going to be fighting against the armies of the nations, man. All right, so these things are all leading up to that moment. All you got to do is pay attention. So let's get the scripture and prophecy. Joel 3 and 9, proclaim you this among the Gentiles, prepare war. Wake up the mighty men, let all the men of war draw near. Let them come up. And that's why you see all the military build up, all these drills and war games. All right, China is welcoming war with the US right now. All these trade wars and currency wars, proxy wars, okay? And everybody's over there stationed centered around the Middle East. All right, because it's all for that final showdown. All right. And the Lord, he's the one that mustereth the host of the battle, as it says in Isaiah the 13th chapter, man. The Lord is getting it ready and popping, man. All right. Verse 10, it says, beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. Okay. And that's why they're getting these, they test firing all these rockets, these missile defense systems. All right. Russia test firing their hypersonic missiles, which is the most advanced ICBM missiles in missile technology. Okay. Trump pulled out of that INF treaty. So is leading to that arms race of nuclear buildup, of nuclear arsenals, man. This thing is really, really, really escalating. It's finna get popping, man. All right. And we hasten in the day of the Lord, man. We praise Yahweh Shem Yahweh Shai when we get these news, man. All right. Because we're getting that much closer to the day of our redemption, our salvation, man. All right. When you constantly pay attention to what's going on in prophecy, it should uplift your spirit, man. To see these things are actually happening in your time, that you're living in these times, man. Okay. And it always keeps you watching, man, because you just curious, man. What else is happening? You wake up in the morning, you look to these articles, to these different sites, and you try to pay attention to see what's going on, man. Because this is all dealing with end time prophecy, man. All right. Let me go from there to Ezekiel 38, and this is dealing with Russia, which we all should know by now. Russia is Gog and Magog in the scriptures. And the Lord is getting them ready, man. This is Ezekiel 38 and 1. It says, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, thus saith the Lord power, behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. All right, so ultimately, even though the Lord is giving that power to Russia right now, the Lord is still prophesying against them because they're going to get taken out too. The Lord's going to destroy those Russians because they think that they're going to have next in rulership. All right. But that's not going to happen. All right. A lot of these different countries, they think that they got next, but it ain't going to happen. All right. Israel got next. Daniel 7 and 18, man. But the saints shall take the kingdom. But we can't do it without Yahweh Shai. All right. So Russia, they thinking they're next in line because, of course, Esau trusts in his sword, and the bigger your sword is, the bigger you're gonna be proud. Okay, you just know that you're gonna be able to take over the world because you live by the sword, man. All right. But anyway, continuing on, verse 4, it says, and I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws, meaning the Lord's gonna actually take control of them. All right, he's gonna put them in that spirit to be constantly at war, man, to build up their military, their weapons, advance their technology, get their troops ready. All right. The Lord is doing that, man. Okay, it says, and I will bring thee forth in all thine army, the whole entire Russian army, and plus they're going to be allied. All right, the Russian army is already advanced enough, their military. But aligned with Russia, select with China and Iran, man, that's an equal match with the U.S. and NATO, man. Really, it's actually they're even more advanced than America and NATO, and even certain individuals that's on the NATO American side, they can even attest to that, man. And that's the reason why they're trying to get their their advancement of their military technology, man. They're trying to get it together because they know that Russia and China is surpassing him. All right. It says, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, and all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, and all of them handling swords, meaning weapons. All right, whether they be tanks, jet bombers, okay, missile defense, ICBM crude missiles, so on and so forth, man. It says Persia, which is Iran, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Gomer, all right, that's Turkey, and all of his bands in the house of Tergama of the north quarters, and all his bands and many people with thee. Be thou prepared and prepare for thyself, thou and all thy company that are assembled unto thee, meaning all those allied countries that are with Russia. All right, basically, not only be ready, but also, all of them that are aligned to you, watch over them. And it's getting ready to say, it says, and be thou a guard unto them. And that's what Russia's role is. He's watching over them and placing weapons, all right, in their hands for their national security, man. And also to prepare, and when this war pop off, they got the soldiers ready, man. All right. So anyway, let's go from there to Revelation, because ultimately it's the Heavenly Father that's getting this ready, man. Revelation 16:12, and the sixth angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. All right, and let me jump down to verse 16. And he gathered them together in a place called, in the Hebrew tongue, Armageddon. In the Hebrew is a Harmagadwan, which means mountain or valley of the troops. All right, and that's all you see over there, man, is the troops gearing up for war. All right, so we in the day of our salvation, man. The Lord said that, you're gonna have the beginning of sorrows, which you're gonna have earthquakes in diverse places. You're going to have wars and rumors of wars, man. Pestilences, and that's what's happening all around the globe right now. Okay? So right now, our redemption is drawing nigh, and we need to be in the spirit. All right, watching and doing whatever it is we need to do to make it, man. So I just want to report on that. Hopefully this was edifying. Call Lord Yahweh Shemiel Shai. Till next time, Shalom.
So despite the rumors you may have heard, I am alive. I am okay. I'm here. For those that were not aware, I went through a small surgery over the last couple of days, which I threw out on some of our TLAV research and reviews, and noted on, I believe, Sunday or Monday that I'd be gone for a couple of days. But some of you had sent some concerns, some emails, wondering where I was. So no worries. No matter what happens, I am never going anywhere. Trust me, my dedication to the truth and to you all for getting the information out there 5 days a week, which I'll even be doing this week. I took my 2 already, and so I have 5 more shows coming your way. But I'm dedicated to that, so never lose faith in that I will never stop doing what I'm doing. On a note on the Wire app, for you guys to be pinged. Some of you got pinged before this show went live today, but understand that it's still growing, so there's not too many people there yet. More interaction will grow as that develops, so make sure you join us on the Wire app if you'd like to get a ping notification before I go live every single show, seeing as how YouTube can't seem to function that properly and doesn't give anybody notifications before we actually go live. So once again, make sure you join the Wire app and look for TLAV or The Last American Vagabond and join the group. And I'll be sure and ping you guys before the shows go live. But thanks again for all of your notes and well wishes. I'm still a little bit out of it today, forced to wear a collared shirt even though I don't normally like to. So I still have a little thing attached to me here that I have to get taken care of on the end of the week. But I'm doing okay, and I'm glad to put that behind me. I even have one of my amazing notes right there from somebody who sent it to me, one of my favorite people. I have that up there for everyone to see. So thank you all for your kind notes and well wishes. But there's a lot to talk about today, to catch up for some of the days that I missed, and just a lot of the things I want to get covered today, so this will be a longer than usual show, and there will not be a research and review, unfortunately, today, because I still need to kind of take it easy, but there's going to be a lot to talk about today, so stick with us, in regard to Israel, to rising war tensions with China and the United States and Russia, all combined, to the migrant caravan and the false claims of invasion, to even more updates on Khashoggi and Saudi Arabia, and much more. So let's get right into it. The first thing I want to touch on today, which I'm very excited about to mention as well, that I have an interview coming up with this person tomorrow, in fact, that I just kind of reached out to today after seeing this article and was very touched by what she's trying to accomplish. I'm very, it takes a lot of courage to do something like this. This coming from Mint Press News, entitled "To American Woman Turns to Hunger Strike to Break Media Blackout on Yemen." And I commend her for doing something, because this, it's dangerous to do something like this. And I'm very, I'm proud to see that there are Americans out there putting themselves in such danger to draw attention to what's really going on, to the millions and millions of civilians that are currently starving to death in Yemen due to the United States-backed actions in that country. And so, her name is Bennett, and I'm going to be speaking with her tomorrow for an interview to discuss what she's going through and everything that she's doing here. So I'm very excited, as well as my interview with Whitney Webb that I conducted a few days ago that I haven't had a chance to edit, will likely be going up today as well. I'll make sure and put that in the show notes when that's done. So in Yemen, as you all know, 18 million civilians are now on the brink of starvation. And even more than that by many, many estimates. That's including 5 million children. Excuse me. The situation in the country, widely considered to be the world's worst humanitarian crisis, possibly even worst ever, which people try to doubt that, but understanding the vast amount of people that are potentially going to starve to death, I don't think that's too far off. And it's entirely man-made. The sordid result of the Saudi Arabian, UAE, US-backed coalition war to control the Middle East's poorest, most impoverished nation. A war that deliberately targets civilian infrastructure and the civilian food and water supplies. Despite the fact that these are obvious, clear war crimes, and despite the mass suffering it's inflicted on Yemen's innocent population, this effort continues to this day to receive US and UK support. Now, in the face of the enormity of this completely preventable crisis, some international activists have taken matters into their own hands, basically giving it their all, their everything, in order to bring much needed attention to the plight of the Yemeni people by, in fact, sacrificing their own quality of life in a stunning and inspiring show of solidarity, as the author called it. Pamela Bennett, who you saw her picture, is an American woman living in San Francisco. And she has been on a hunger strike since October 8th in an effort to show solidarity with Yemenis facing famine and to raise awareness in the United States in particular about upcoming congressional efforts to reduce or end the U.S.'s role in the genocide currently consuming Yemen. Now, Bennett is not alone in her efforts, as a contact from her Facebook page, Yemen Rising, which the link is in this article for you to check out, is also currently in the 7th day of the hunger strike. Bennett is on her 23rd day. Now, as I understand it, there were some complications, and she was forced to begin taking some juice and different things to make sure that she didn't have any serious health complications. But she is still on her hunger strike. But understand, this is not a luxury afforded to the Yemeni people that are currently starving to death with no juice or broth to take in case of some kind of a health complication. And really, and important as well, any person interested in participating in this hunger strike alongside Bennett to raise more attention to this, I urge you to contact her through her Facebook page, Yemen Rising, or her personal Facebook page, both of which are in this article in the show notes for you to check out. But I commend her for her efforts here, and hopefully if we draw enough attention to this with my interview with her tomorrow, it's something that can really draw a parallel to what's going. This is just a small aspect of what's going on every day for average people in Yemen. So thank you, Bennett, for your efforts here, and hopefully we can raise more attention to what's going on. Now, in the same... Well, there's plenty more about Saudi Arabia and Yemen that I'm going to get to in a moment, but another story that I think is very important to touch on before we get to the rest of that, which many of you likely heard in the last couple of days when I was out. I wasn't able to report on it the day that this was announced, but this coming from Anti-Media in regard to the migrant caravan, entitled, "Our Military is Waiting for You." Trump warns as 5,000 troops sent to Mexican border. Which, you know my opinions on this. This is a dramatic jump in the wrong direction, as I see it. Many are very emotionally tied to this. Immediately hearing something like that, saying, "Oh, how can you be okay with the invasion of our people?" But that's the problem. This is not an invasion. There's more to this story than even, and most of this information people regurgitate comes directly from the media, just taking their statements as fact. Of course, without doing their own due diligence, but we'll get into more of that. Now, the U.S. military will deploy 5,000 troops to the southern border. This is up from these initial estimates of 800, which we also reported on. This is coming from U.S. officials. The troops will be sent to Texas, Arizona, and California as Central American migrants in the caravan make its way north through Mexico. Now, Defense Secretary James Mattis told reporters Sunday that the military has already started to deploy countermeasures to the southern border. Following weekend reports, thank you for the super chat, whoever just sent that in, looking through the abyss. I appreciate that. I promise you I am alienating my friends as fast as I can. They will pay attention. I have no time. This must end. I appreciate that. Thank you very much for your support. Now, the countermeasures being deployed to the southern border, following weekend reports that Mexican police had abandoned their own blockades as a massive Central American migrant caravan continues to march north. This according to Associated Press. Now, the numbers are widely varying, which should be an indication also that there's a lot of manipulation going on in this. Anywhere from 5,000, I've seen reports of 17,000, all over the map. Now, on Monday, President Trump warned the caravan, actually tweeting out, as he so often does, many gang members and some very bad people are mixed into the caravan, heading to our southern border. This is an invasion of our country, and our military is waiting for you. Now, I'm sure that's more than likely. I mean, likely even. I mean, really, the fact that there are probably bad people in that caravan is probably a foregone conclusion. But nonetheless, there's no evidence of this that we get to see. They claim they hear from this, and they know there's no evidence to support that, even though it's more than likely the case. But this is a political move. And it's also important to understand that there are plenty of people in this caravan that are simply just actual migrants that probably had intentions of going through the right channels. But the entirety of this moving group of people has now been condemned as infiltrators, as Israel calls every kind of migrant that goes into their country, or just an invasion, which is a little bit ridiculous. It's another broad stroke of the entirety of people. Yes, understand that even along the Guatemalan-Mexican border, there were people that were actually let through before they all bombarded the fences and jumped. And even after that, then people that were just walking through anyway. So it does not broad stroke make every single person in this caravan a problem. But that's how it's being addressed by people in the two-party deception. These people are either all welcome or all evil villains trying to invade our country, neither of which are the truth. And I think even most of these people know that, but it's about politics today, of course, coming up to the elections, of course, which, again, the next story we'll get into acutely. Now, Vice President Mike Pence warned this weekend, of course, that the caravan was being funded by outside leftist groups, citing intelligence, he says, was provided by foreign partners with telephone calls, basically information that can never really be confirmed, and if history's any indication, never will be. Now, I've also said, in my opinion, it's very clear that there is manipulation going here. We saw the video, people handing out money, whether that even of itself was the manipulation. But we've also seen all kinds of reason to think, just logistically, that this is orchestrated. But who's behind it is completely we're guessing at this point. And everybody has their guess that they're certain about. But at the end of the day, outside leftist groups, it's all about politics. Driving you to vote is the end game here. And that's all we really need to know, that they're manipulating you on both sides of the two-party deception. Now, in a related story, this one coming from Activist Post, and one that I felt was very, very well done, entitled, "If the Migrant Caravan is an Invasion, What's the term for what the U.S. is doing in Syria, Iraq, etc.?" And etc., summing up etc., and summing up and a number of other countries we can include in a long list there. But now, depending on which side of the TV, of course, where most people go, get there, or rather the computer screen today, I guess you would call it, get your information from, which side of the two-party false paradigm, you're either waiting for thousands of migrant women and children seeking their part of the American dream to show up in Arizona or wherever else, or you're waiting for armed terrorists sent here by George Soros in an invasion mission ready to kill you and take your job. The reality, however, is neither of these. It is a verifiable fact that roughly 5,000 men, women, and children, as they say here, but the numbers are widely varying wherever you look. It's a verifiable fact that this group is making a northward trek by foot, bus, and any other means through Mexico. The reason for the trip, however, is not to invade the United States, but rather to seek asylum from an assault originating in Washington, D.C. that has long been perpetuated against the people of Central America by both parties, the left and the right. The reality is that these folks are not moving or migrating, rather are fleeing the violence in their homeland. That is a direct result of American policy in that region. While the United States does not have a migrant crisis, we most assuredly have a refugee crisis, and it's the fault of the U.S. oligarchy. Now, as I said, it's clear that it's being manipulated, orchestrated even, but the root cause is their own. Now, starting under Ronald Reagan, the U.S. has been funding extremist military regimes who've carried out mass murder, kidnappings, tortures in El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and on and on and on. U.S.-backed military coups, exploitation of resources, and America's history of spreading economic neoliberalism, these neo-colonial efforts in El Salvador, have sent the entire region into absolute chaos. Just like what happens in all the countries who've been unfortunate enough to receive some freedom from the United States. What's more, it's effectively created a climate where paramilitary-aligned drug cartels can and do thrive. While it's been widely reported that the caravan, as it's being called, is headed to the United States, according to some reports, they ultimately just be fleeing the immediate area, and they may actually never even make it here to the United States. Interestingly enough, credit where credit is due, as much as I do not like to look to any mainstream channel, Fox News anchor Shepard Smith actually laid this out rather clearly on Monday, which likely caused the Fox News viewers' heads to explode. He said, tomorrow, the migrants, according to Fox News reporting, are more than 2 months away from the United States, if any of them actually come here at all. He said this on Monday. But tomorrow is 1 week before the midterm elections, which is what this is all about. I was actually quite surprised to see this even coming from a mainstream channel. Smith went on to point out that a very similar scenario played out in April, and very little came of it. He said, quote, when they did this to us, got us all riled up in April, remember? He said, the result was 14 arrests. That's it. He said, we're America. We can handle it. But like I said, a week to the election. Good for him. For whatever reason, they're trying to play the independent media card. I still don't ever feel that they're trying to do it for the right reasons, but it's good to see the truth slip out there. That ultimately, that they're showing you that this caravan may just kind of mitigate it and it just kind of not really even reach the United States in the way that they're making it seem. Or that's complete falsity, and maybe it will. But the point is that we don't ultimately know. But we're jumping to conclusions based on political fervor. I mean, they're trying to get you emotionally riled up. That is the point. People fleeing conflict in their country, that is a direct result of bipartisan American policy. It does nothing for either of the parties' platforms, ultimately. However, when you can spin what's happening to make the other guys look bad by lying to Americans, as they all too often do, almost entirely, about why there are thousands of people walking through Mexico, then you have the makings of a political campaign. To call this an invasion like they are is not only entirely inaccurate, but it's hypocritical. Even if the majority of this caravan does make it to the U.S. border, there is absolutely no way that they could or would invade us, even without the U.S. military that Trump is sending that way. Fleeing to another country because your children are being kidnapped, murdered, or tortured as a direct result of foreign governments meddling in your country is not an invasion. On the contrary, however, flying tanks, bombs, jets, and troops overseas and stationing yourself inside the border of a sovereign nation without being invited, that is an invasion. Democrats and Republicans are all for invasions when it's the U.S. who is carrying them out. One need only look at the nearly 800 plus military bases in more than 70 countries across the planet that the U.S. maintains to prove that point. Moreover, one need only look at a list of countries the United States has entered without permission, or just over the last 2 decades even, like Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, to name a few, and laid waste to their infrastructure, populations, and environments under a flimsy guise of humanitarianism. Saving the people as we murder the people. Thank you so much for your super chat, Lisa. I tell many that if I were forced at gunpoint to pick one place for news, it would be The Last American Vagabond. Love you. Thank you very much. I appreciate the support, Lisa. I appreciate all of you out there who support The Last American Vagabond. Thank you so much, Lisa. But ultimately, as they finish in this article, it says U.S. tanks rolling down the streets of southern Syria in Al-Tanf, which we've talked about a lot on this show, is what an actual invasion looks like. Not men, women, and children fleeing U.S.-created violence. I mean, it's such an important contrast to see. Now, that doesn't make this influx of people not a danger. But the way it's being dealt with is manipulating your emotions. Like the point he makes in this article. Simply the border, the way it's set up, with people who are simply seemingly just trying to come into the United States, could effectively deal with this in a slow but determined way. The militarization of the border and the way that they're dealing with this is designed to do what it's doing. To cause people to reflexively lash out, which I'm sure I will get in the comments of this video, about how I'm, any number of things. I could go off on all the comments that I've already gotten by briefly touching on this topic and not falling into one of two boxes. It's frustrating, and hopefully you don't fall for the same. Now, a very excellent video that I recommend you watch that also touches on this, coming from Ben Swan yesterday or today, how U.S. foreign policy created the migrant crisis in Honduras. Now, he always does a great job, and his video is fantastic. He points out the fact that in the 20th century alone, the U.S. military was sent to Honduras 7 different times. For what reason, you may ask? Well, of course, to support multinational corporations, because that's what the U.S. military is for, right? To support multinational corporations with your tax dollars. This is people like the United Fruit Company and the Standard Fruit Company. And, of course, to crush strikes against these authoritarian companies and then, of course, keep the money flowing. We've talked about Reagan and the Contras, or just flat-out coups and revolutions to overthrow the democratically elected governments of this country and these countries in general in South America, and then to continue one after the other of dictators that they can control. This is what this all comes back to. It's important to understand the real story here and then deal with this in an appropriate way. But the way that they're doing it to militarize our country even more is problem, reaction, solution. So don't fall for it. Now, getting back to some of the stuff on Saudi Arabia, I really think that this is kind of the bulk of the show today. A lot going on there that I want to talk about. This one in regard to Khashoggi, to pronounce his name that's easiest for people to recognize. There's a lot of stuff happening today. This story, in fact, was reported by mainstream media. But I also, before I even get into the story, I asked the honest question, or even point out the obvious fact. It seems like they interestingly skipped over the story where Saudi Arabia admitted that it was premeditated murder. Interesting how that worked. How they cover the shootings and everything different, and they fail to cover the main story that they admitted they planned it, even though they've been lying. And now they hop back on this story, which seems like more kind of like, we'll wait to see what comes out of it. This entitled, Turkey Says Saudi Strangled Khashoggi Immediately on Entering the Consulate. Dismembered body, which most of this we already know, but this story is pointing out a simple fact, that they strangled him when he walked in, so it was planned from the get-go. It's not fist fights that got out of control. No, it's not all these lies they've tried to feed us. Now, hours after a story claiming that Saudi Arabia is still refusing to cooperate with the Turkish investigators, which should also give us a clear insight to what's going on here, looking into the murder of insider-turned-dissident Jamal Khashoggi, Istanbul's head prosecutor delivered a statement revealing more incriminating details about the circumstances surrounding the journalist's murder, which it was, at the hands of a 15-man hit squad inside the kingdom's Istanbul consulate. Now, these are the people that flew in under cover of night and left under cover of diplomatic immunity carrying bags full of Khashoggi's chopped up body. This is the people that you support with your tax dollars. Now, the Khashoggi murder was clearly, as they admitted to, a premeditated act ordered by senior intelligence officers and possibly the Crown Prince himself, which was my opinion. And Istanbul's head prosecutor said Wednesday that Khashoggi was strangled to death as soon as he entered the consulate in a murder that was likely pre-planned, which we know it was. They've admitted that fact. His body was then cut to pieces and presumably smuggled out of the consulate. Now, this is now, again, coming from Turkey, mind you, but seemingly they've at least, the things they've, insinuated have seemed to come to pass. But we can't just take their word for it like anybody, but we can include it in our general understanding of the situation. But the fact that they've already said we premeditated, we planned to do this, we called him in here, we snuck his body out with a foreign collaborator, it's absurd to see that this story is even going forward in the mainstream that's covering it as if this is still an undetermined story. We're not sure how this is going to end up. The Saudis murdered this man. And now it's just these little details that are coming out. The truth is that something needs to happen here. But as we know, the U.S. will likely do nothing, which I'll get into more in a moment. Another greatly related story with regard to the UK coming from anti-war entitled Britain Knew of the Khashoggi plot, begged Saudis not to act, but unfortunately did nothing to stop them. Sounds very similar to the fact that the United States knew he was going to be murdered and didn't do anything about it. I wonder why. It's a good question. Now, British media are reporting that the GCHQ, or the British version of the NSA, had intercepts given them 3 weeks advance notice before the death of Jamal Khashoggi that a plot was happening. Now, just like the U.S., they both did nothing to ultimately stop it. The intercept suggested the Saudis were concerned about some forthcoming Khashoggi reports on the war in Yemen, which is very relevant, I'll get to in a moment. So they were concerned something was coming out about what the Saudis were doing in Yemen. Think about how big that could be. We know they're murdering and starving and raping and torturing, but what could be so big that they would kill a man over it? Keep that in mind. Now, Britain apparently begged, they say, which I would argue likely didn't even happen, the Saudis not to follow through, but to no avail, meaning they did nothing else. Britain's intercepts also apparently attributed the plot to a member of the royal circle, they say, of the Saudis, though they concede they don't know for sure if it was the Crown Prince, as would generally be assumed, of course. Legally, it's unclear if Britain was obligated to tell Khashoggi of all of this, which I think morally that's absolutely the case. It will raise concerns again about the United States, which we should all be considering, who did have a legal obligation to warn him. A permanent resident, but then chose not to. Ask yourself why. Now, going back to that same point, this one is a very interesting thing that I've only seen reported a couple of times in regard to why they may have had him murdered. And this has been a question we've all been asking, but this may indeed be the linchpin in all of this. Coming from Express.co, entitled Khashoggi's Murder. Journalists plan to release details of Saudi chemical weapon use, which would absolutely implicate the United States. Very, very revealing. Now, this is something we should take with a grain of salt like anything else, because it's coming from people close to Khashoggi who've spoken out to this paper, but it seems to make a lot of sense, but take from it what you will. Now, it's been revealed that these people close to Khashoggi, that he was essentially about to obtain what they say documentary evidence that Saudi Arabia had in fact used chemical weapons against the Yemeni people during its ongoing illegal U.S.-backed invasion. That is very profound. Now, after this, he immediately went missing, apparently, and they greatly feel this is exactly what it's related to. Now, this is a big deal. Now, this is almost burying the lead in the title of this video today, but personally, I can't independently verify that this is true. It's coming from people who spoke to this paper. You know, they could be making it up for all we know. So I didn't want to make sure to put this in the title, but this is a big story. We have very clear evidence of them using illegal cluster bombs, using white phosphorus, claiming, it's for cover, as they say, but using it directly against people, which is a war crime. It's a violation of the, I think it's the Geneva Convention, but just the chemical weapons treaty that they have, that they used it anyway, because they got it from the United States. So talking about things like sarin, which is what they mentioned in this article, that the Saudis were using sarin or other chemicals on the Yemeni people, and that he was going to expose this, and that's why Khashoggi was murdered. That would make all of this make sense. And then seeing that Turkey and the United States continue to extort them to not release the information that they have. So Trump gets his oil, his arms deals. Saudis buy the S-400s instead of the THAAD missiles instead of the S-400s. Russia versus the United States. And Turkey gets whatever it's been extorting from them for not releasing all of the details. And everything goes back to normal. Which is exactly where it seems to be going. So bear this in mind. This seems like the linchpin in all of this personally, but as always, come to your own conclusions. But there seems to be maybe still a shift happening in regard to the power structure in Saudi Arabia. Possibly. We don't know for sure just yet, but maybe it's because Mohammed bin Salman has drawn too much heat and they need to bury the story as quick as possible so they don't reveal that they've been using chemical weapons on civilians, the same thing that they lie about in regard to Syria to justify all the horrible things they do, in their minds, mind you. This story coming from Geopolitics Alert entitled, Saudi Dissident Prince Flies Home to Tackle MBS Succession. Very interesting story here. And the real important part to this is who's involved and who's facilitating this. Now, Prince Ahmed bin Abdulaziz, the younger brother of King Salman, has returned to Saudi Arabia after a prolonged absence in London, apparently to mount a challenge to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman or find someone who can. Seems like a very dangerous thing to do, knowing the recent past of all of the murders and imprisonment of other princes and people in high places. But the important part is who's backing this. The prince, an open critic of bin Salman, has traveled with security guarantees given by the U.S. and the UK officials. It is staggering to see the level to which the United States and the UK are involved with this. Is an open coup. They're guaranteeing this man's security to go in and try to attempt to challenge the rule of bin Salman. This is very ridiculous to see. But it shows you the deep control the U.S. and Israel have over Saudi Arabia. It said, quote, he and others in the family have realized that MBS has become toxic. This coming from a Saudi source close to Prince Ahmad told the Middle East Eye. It said, quote, the prince wants to play a role to make these changes, which means either he himself will play a major role in any new arrangements or to help to choose an alternative to MBS. Either way, clearly saying that we're looking to move him out of his position. Very alarming, and maybe to his detriment, because what ultimately the U.S. UK guarantees of security don't mean much when he's there, but that would put a big issue maybe to reveal information about them if he didn't go along with it. That'd be meaning MBS. Now, the source said that the prince returned, quote, after discussion with U.S. and UK officials who assured him that they would not let him be harmed and encouraged him to play the role of usurper. This is quite crazy. This is Game of Thrones style stuff we're seeing right out on the front page, like right in front of us. This isn't being hidden under the guise of humanitarianism. They're just saying, well, MBS is getting some bad attention right now. We don't want to hinder our atrocious genocidal war in Yemen, so we need to make sure we put someone else in place that we can continue to pretend this is a developing reformist country that it's really not. Very revealing. We'll keep track of this and let you know what happens, but seems likely that he may, in fact, actually lose his position, but we'll have to wait and see. Another related story coming from Zero Hedge and related to Israel's play in all this in regard to the continual support for such a horrible place that is Saudi Arabia, or rather the leadership that makes it that way. This entitled, Israel quietly transferred $250 million of sophisticated spy systems to Saudi Arabia. Which is not too shocking to those of us that are paying attention. But the reality is that Israel is equally involved in all of these horrible things that are taking place. Now, despite the two nations still not having like an official diplomatic relations, a new bombshell report is confirmed that Israel and Saudi Arabia have somewhat of a quiet but growing security relationship. And it's far more extensive than people had previously thought, as it now includes a $250 million deal for Israeli tech for spying in Yemen. Now, the kingdom has yet to officially recognize the state of Israel, but continue a close behind-the-scenes alliance based on intelligence sharing, especially in places like Syria or Yemen, of course, in order to counter Iran. But I think, personally, the idea of not recognizing Israel, the false state of Israel that it is to make sure that we don't make the connection that's clearly there. That Israel's connection from the very beginning of Saudi Arabia. It's a vassal state of Israel and the United States, largely Israel, the creation of Saudi Arabia. So I think not recognizing them officially is to try to distance any real clear connections that are obviously there. Now, the report goes on to describe the spy systems as, quote, the most sophisticated systems Israel has ever sold to any Arab country. And notes they've already been transferred to Saudi Arabia, where a Saudi technical team will undergo training to operate them. from Israel. So clearly there's a connection there if they're going to go train them on how to use this stuff, but we're not officially connected. Now, to the surprise of no one paying attention, it appears the United States and Britain may also have had a role in this cementing of the deal. Big surprise. Thank you very much, Sammy, for your super chat. I appreciate that. Israel and Saudi have been two heads of the same snake since the 1950s. Completely agree. That's exactly what we're saying, is that they're all interconnected. And I've always often said Saudi Arabia is the dog that they sick on other countries of the U.S. and Israel. But thank you for your super chat, Sammy. I appreciate it. Now, we also recently discussed reports that Saudi Arabia had purchased Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system amidst its ongoing illegal invasion of Yemen, which, of course, was a big bombshell that everyone discussed, but Israel immediately denied that they transferred this technology at the time, while Riyadh kept basically silent about it. They said, quote, "We deny the existence of a deal to sell Iron Dome to Saudi Arabia, but now with this recent revelation, there may be more to this truth to this than they ultimately want to admit." But can't prove at the point in regard to the Iron Dome, but it seems very clear that they're continuing to help them in any way they can, even more so on the ground in Yemen, which we know Israel and the United States are involved in. But now giving them sophisticated spy equipment only makes this worse. But they don't care because they're doing the very same things they're doing to the Palestinian people. This is open ethnic cleansing, and they can probably have some kind of kinship in their desire to just carry out genocide. It's pretty horrible to see these people working together to continue to maintain the horrible things they're committing. But and again, the real point for an American is that our tax dollars are going to support these two groups. How is that the case? I ask myself that every day. How do we justify supporting the two worst human rights violators in the world? Or one of three, I should say. Now, of course, getting into Yemen, coming from anti-media, something I thought was relevant in this larger discussion for people that may want to kind of forget that Yemen is still an ongoing, horrible, genocidal, ethnic cleansing event that we're being forced to ignore by the mainstream media. This entitled "True Yemen Death Toll 5 Times Higher Than Previous Estimate," researchers say. Of course, showing that cartoon that Jim Carrey drew. If only Jim Carrey could draw a cartoon every time they attack a bus full of people or a car full of people. He'd be doing one every day, mind you. But maybe, just maybe, we could force all the people out there to pay attention to the horrible things going on. But now we know that the numbers here are much, much higher than we even thought. At least 56,000 people. 56,000. And honestly, I've seen numbers much higher than that as well. But these researchers are saying now 56,000 people have been killed just in armed violence in Yemen since January 2016, according to data collected by an independent research group, a tally that is more than 5 times higher than previously reported. The new figure encompasses the deaths of both combatants and civilians in Yemen between January 2016 and October 20th, 2018. Now, it's, I believe, Andrea Carboni explained. She's a research analyst at the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, or ACLED. Thank you, Jilly Love, for your super chat. Equality and justice for all, she says, make America and the world green again. Hear, hear. Now, this is Andrea Carboni and this research group are the ones that put this out there. Excuse me. Now, it does not take these numbers, in fact, don't take into account, which I think is one of the largest aspects, which is Yemenis who have died as a result of the humanitarian crisis engulfing the country and its related problems, such as diseases, malnutrition, the blockade, the starving to death of the entire country. Journalists and humanitarian workers have often, as many of you have likely seen, cited a figure of about 10,000 deaths over and over and over since 2016. But that total has staggeringly remained static since 2016. Despite the ongoing war and bus bombings and all the horrible things we continue to report on. And what's ridiculous is they continue to just keep the number the same, claiming that, since we can't get reliable information, as they claim, we just keep reporting that it's 10,000. Since 2016. That is the most dishonest thing I've ever heard in my life, but then they continue to report it as 10,000. We've known it's much, much higher than that, as this article goes on to point, that even their new numbers of 56,000 are likely a drastic underestimate. Based on an estimate of around 2,000 fatalities every month in Yemen. 2,000! Total deaths between the start of the conflict in 2015 to the end of this year is expected to sit between 70 and 80,000. This is from Carboni. Now, last week, Oxfam even reported that since August, at least one civilian has been killed every 3 hours fighting in Yemen. Civilians, average people fighting for their homes. And this continues to go on with your tax dollars, your support, with the United States oligarchy directly behind it, as they continue to talk about one person or fake bombs that they sent to themselves or any number of things that they distract us from the horrible, possibly one of the worst humanitarian crises in the history of the planet being carried out with the U.S. support. That is the biggest story that is happening today. Maybe not the most important to some Americans, but should be one of them, at the very least, knowing that your government that you vote for, that you stand behind, is helping to carry this out. But most definitely one of the most important stories in the world today. And we cannot let that diminish. Of course, in another related story, the showing you that regardless of all of this stuff, and regardless of the Khashoggi story and all the claims of something will happen and repercussions and nonsense over and over, U.S. continues to support the bloody dictatorship of Saudi Arabia. Unequivocally, unendingly, unceasingly supporting this group. All the claims they make. Of course, this actually coming from Consortium News, but I liked Anti-Media's revamped title much more. The U.S. continues to support the bloody dictatorship of Saudi Arabia. Regardless. We know what happened. We know he died. We know Khashoggi was murdered. We know they admitted to strangling him. They admitted to premeditated murder. Turkey says that they strangled him right when he walked in. We know they got rid of his body. And we know they lied about him leaving to begin with. Where are the consequences, Donald Trump? Where are the consequences you promised if this country did what you thought they did? Which they did do. And we know this now. Just like I said, there never was going to be any consequences. Trump's own words saying we cannot risk the arms deals that we have with this horrible genocidal group. Just think about what that's saying. Not only were we being lied to, that they were ever going to do anything, they knew from the beginning, as we pointed out, that he was in danger, his life was in danger, that he was going to be murdered, and did nothing about it. The UK knew he was in danger and did nothing about it. When are we going to realize these people are lying to us? When are we going to realize that all of it is a big manipulation as they continue business as usual? Go back and look at our past shows, exactly like we said would come to pass. Sadly, even with all of my hopeful ambition just hope for the good in people, I know it's there. But sadly, I know these people. And I know what they do and what they've done because I research it, as you hopefully do as well. And I was right. Because they continue to support the bloody dictatorship of Saudi Arabia. Now, the U.S. continues to support this dictatorship as a key ally, even after the horrific murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And as we continue to point out, the horrendous 5-year bombing campaign on Yemen. Now, some members of U.S. Congress are actually calling for Trump to distance himself from the Saudi regime due to the murder of Khashoggi, of course, which is one man versus tens of thousands, potentially to 18 million Yemenis dying, and take serious steps, including stopping weapons sales and sanctions. Little connection is made to the horrific number of deaths in Yemen, from Saudi and U.S. bombings, and with UAE support as well, with the exception of Bernie Sanders, who he reintroduced the Senate Joint Resolution 54, which I believe is one that Bennett was talking about in the beginning. But there's a lot of different things we should put our support with. But truthfully, I don't think that anything coming from Congress is really going to change this. That's my jaded idea, because I truly feel like I understand that all of these people don't really care about what's going on here. It's about politics for them. But what we can do is draw enough attention, including with this, if you choose to vote, just draw enough attention to the reality of it, and hopefully the world will stand up against this. But Joint Resolution 54 calls for the end of refueling and intelligence sharing after Congress reconvenes, and hundreds more Yemenis have died, of course. But just ending refueling and intelligence is not going to truly end this. But it's a step, and I support it. I don't support anyone out there, Bernie Sanders or otherwise, but I support anything that stops the deaths happening in Yemen. As the Saudi regime murders its own country, its diplomatic missions in Turkey, and through its proxy militias in Syria, Iraq, and many other countries, the U.S. wrongly continues to support this dictatorship. And remember, as a key ally, one of two today, Saudi Arabia and Israel. Just let that sink in as they continue to stand on their moral high horse in regard to influx of migrants and all the number of things they talk about, as the horrendous things they do around the world, as if it plays no factor in all of it. Now, in regard to some other foreign policy and what these actions they're doing around the world are causing, as I recently pointed out with Russia in regard to the creating the raised tension with other nuclear powers, this coming from Anti-Media, entitled China's President Orders Military to Prepare for War. Now, not the entirety of the blame can be laid on the United States, because China is just as provocative in a lot of ways. But the point of all of this is that the actions of our government today are incendiary. Instead of trying to de-escalate in any way possible without necessarily backing down, instead it goes the other way. It's like children on a playground continuing to raise the bar, which is not what true leaders do. And instead we're now seeing Russia and China continue to, quote, prepare for war, largely due to U.S. actions. Now, China President Xi Jinping ordered the military region responsible for monitoring the South China Sea and Taiwan to, quote, assess the situation it is facing and boost its capabilities so it can handle any emergency, which, face value, doesn't seem too incendiary, as tensions continue to mount over the future of the South China Sea and Taiwan, while diplomatic relations between Washington and Beijing hit rock bottom. Thank you, Stephen, for your super chat. Greens, people, planet, peace over the profit. Absolutely. gpus.org. Thank you for the super chat, Stephen. The point being here, though, is that I made this point earlier, that they always claim the free movement and all that, which is I'll get to in a moment. But South China Sea is clearly at least much more closely in relation to China. It's as if China coming in and trying to continue to sail its warships right around Florida and say, oh, well, we're just freely moving about. The United States would not be okay with that either. But they try to make it, they always frame it in a way that makes them as the bad guy, which is not necessarily untrue. I think all of these groups are wrong in certain ways. But why continue to escalate the tensions, I ask. Now they say, quote, it's necessary to strengthen the mission and concentrate preparations for fighting a war. This is coming from China. We need to take all complex situations into consideration and make emergency plans accordingly. And really, if you take that at face value, he's basically saying respond to what they're doing. He says we have to step up combat readiness exercises, joint exercises, and confrontational exercises to enhance servicemen's capabilities in preparation for war. Now, the president instructed the military to ramp up opposition to freedom of navigation exercises, which is what has been taken by the U.S., Australia, France, and the UK, and even Japan, and others through the waterway, through the shipping lanes that have grown around, ultimately since the end of World War II. But the point here is trying to force this issue as the claim of freedom of navigation. And I find it shockingly hypocritical to talk about freedom of navigation only when it applies to what the United States military is trying to accomplish. But when other groups talk about freedom of navigation, say maybe the migrant caravan, that doesn't apply. But of course, for the U.S., who wants to sail its military vessels all around China, then of course, where's our freedom of navigation? I mean, it's not the exact same thing, but it's the same thing where they continue to be hypocritical about what applies to them because they're the U.S. oligarchy and they can do what they want. Now, Xi's words represent a significant ramp up in the rhetoric between Beijing and China. Beijing and Washington. China has been angered by U.S. sanctions, of course, on its military for buying weapons from from Russia. But the absurdity for me of that is neither of them are allies of the United States. So of course they're going to work together. How does the U.S. have the right to sanction China for buying stuff from Russia? It seems laughable to me. But it's just another way to continue to, why even do that? It's provocative. It's meant to create this kind of drama. And Beijing sees it as renewed Washington's, really the big key for me here is Taiwan. As it's Washington's renewed support for what they say a democratic Taiwan. And that's a big issue for China. Understand that Taiwan itself wants to be independent. And China claims that that's their territory. And now U.S. is nosing its way in and saying, well, Taiwan has a right to be free, but when, free means under U.S. control, mind you. But I'm not even disagreeing with that, but understand, have some perspective in this. Consider if China came in and said, hey, well, Hawaii and Puerto Rico, they should be free and sovereign. You don't have a right to take over their countries and just to say that they're now part of the United States. It's the exact same thing. And mind you that I lived in Hawaii for 2 years, and they do not think that they're part of the United States. So if given the choice, they would absolutely go into being their own sovereign Hawaii. And maybe China say, hey, well, they should be because they want to be. It's the exact same thing. And do you think the United States would be okay with that? Absolutely not. Again, it doesn't mean that Hawaii should not be free. It doesn't mean Taiwan should not be free. But we need perspective in these things. They continue to force it as in the mainstream as this very clear narrative, and they don't give you the entire view, as they never do. Just think about all the different dynamics at play here. And at the very least, that the United States is just as guilty about all the things they're talking about, which doesn't make either of them right. But hopefully you can see the bigger picture. Now, meanwhile, the U.S. recently sailed 2 warships right through the Strait of the Taiwan Strait, again claiming freedom of navigation and further angering China, knowing that would happen. This is the goal, to create this, draw more threats for more military-industrial complex profits. More weapons, more war. That's what they want. And many other larger things that are harder for people to grasp. We can get into the engineered fall of the West and other potential topics that I likely will get into in the near future. But at the end of the day, the profit is the easiest for the average person to wrap their mind around, and clearly that's part of it. For the next story, and the second to last story of the day, coming from Zero Hedge, in regard to the same concept, but in regard to Russia, as we recently talked about, Russia planning series of missile tests amid NATO's largest military exercise since the Cold War. Now, very simple concept here to understand, which we've talked about. We talked about the continued claim of Russian aggression that's almost impossible to demonstrate. That they continue to say, that's why we need this massive NATO drill that includes a non-NATO country of Ukraine, the neo-Nazi group that they created. Of course, let's just include them too and make this all about surrounding Russia. But it's not about Russia. This is just a casual drill we're doing because we always do them, as they continue to say. And then later say, but it's aimed at Russian aggression. To contradict themselves. They do that every time. But they will never outright say this is meant to anger Russia, which is what it is. Now, NATO, 50,000 NATO troops are massing in Scandinavia for the military alliance's annual Trident Juncture military exercise, which is designed as a show of force. As Ron Paul points out roundly about these, that they're designed to be provocative. There's no real point in doing this. It's designed to be a show of force to threaten the country they're aimed at, which is Russia in this regard. Now, this is an affair that's been expanded to become the largest NATO exercise since the end of the Cold War, in reflection of the deepening hostilities with Russia. Now, it appears that President Vladimir Putin has decided to flex some military muscle of his own in response to this. That's the key, in response to this. Not on his own, but because of their actions, he's being forced to respond, which will be in turn used as a reason to do more. Now, as Radio Free Europe reports, the Russian Navy has alerted NATO that it is planning to test missiles in international waters off Norway's coast this week. NATO commanders will undoubtedly seize on Russia's decision to help justify even more aggressive displays of military force in the future. This is exactly the point. Just like we saw in North Korea. They surround the country and do all these aggressive war drills, pretending to decapitate the president and nuclear bomb the country, and then they shoot off a missile and they go, oh, look at them. They're being aggressive. We need to be so fearful of North Korea. They're creating the circumstances which cause these things to happen and then use the reaction to justify the very things they did first. It's just ridiculous. It's juvenile. I mean, really. And hopefully we can begin to recognize it, but that's exactly what they want to create and what they are creating. Hopefully you can be smart enough to see through it. Because the last thing any of us need is more aggression between nuclear powers, regardless of who's right or wrong. Who cares who's right or wrong when the world's destroyed by nuclear weapons? Seems pretty simple to me. But hopefully you can come to your own conclusions. For the last story of the day, which I think is frustrating enough, but it's an important one to include, coming from MiddleEastMonitor.com, entitled, How Google Wipes Palestine Off the Map. with all things we've been talking about, with the recent bombings of Gaza that were perfectly covered by the synagogue shooting, which is interesting that it happens to be a synagogue shooting at the moment that they're bombing Gaza. Of course, just murdering civilians under the guise of fighting Hamas, which doesn't make any sense. Now we come to find out that, oh, look, Google, of all people, are just completely wiping off Palestine in their Google Maps app. Not very surprising, because, like all other Silicon Valley monopolies, which is what they are, Google habitually takes the side of the Israeli occupation and the war crimes in Palestine. The very term Palestine is not used by their highly influential Maps app. How can that possibly be? A new report by a Palestinian human rights group last month exposed the depths of Google's dedication to the Israeli occupation. With a known history documented back more than 3,200 years, the name Palestine is the only term continuously used for the entire territory of the country lying between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. Palestine is the most historically accurate term. But since 1948, when Zionist militias expelled the majority of the Palestinian population from the country by force, a new state, Israel, the fake state of Israel, the occupied state of Palestine, was established. The state has never declared its borders, mind you. I wonder why that is. Maybe the Greater Israel Project, or they plan to take more and more? In 2016, Google came under fire from Palestinians on social media when the terms West Bank and Gaza disappeared from Google Maps. You don't say it disappeared. Google said that the removal of these terms was down to a glitch. I love that ever-present glitch that we always talk about. And that they had never used the word Palestine in the first place. This is what we're talking about when they just rewrite history. Whoops, it just disappears. Like when YouTube went down for half a day. Oh, I wonder what they were doing. Rewriting history. And they say, quote, though its mapping and labeling, or through its mapping and labeling, the report claims, one can deduce that Google Maps recognizes the existence of Israel, with Jerusalem as its capital, but not Palestine. Google Maps makes sure that the areas that Israel does not recognize as legitimate simply cease to exist on their maps. Now think about that for a moment. These are people that exist. We all know they're there. Yet Google chooses to pretend they're not there because Israel says so. What more do we need to see to understand the influence that Israel has over our social media, over this country? It's astounding. Because they don't regard, they think the Palestinians don't need to be there. And even more ridiculous, talking about Trump's, deal of the century with their two-state solution. Israel doesn't even want them to exist. And they're going to make sure of that unless we do something about it. Regardless of all the hate that just talking about these subjects will draw, claims of anti-Semitism and the ridiculous nature of that, of pointing out the evil Zionist country that is Israel, not the people all that live there. Sadly, many of them are all brainwashed by the same thing, maybe even most of them. But there are, plenty of Jewish people that see what they're really trying to do and recognize that they've hijacked their religion and used it for their Zionist purposes. But sadly, it's a lot of the people that even live there too. But we need to do something about it. Moral, honest, good human beings in the world that actually recognize the horrible actions of Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United States oligarchy and stand up to it. Do something about it. Because if we don't, who will? As that paraphrasing the classic quote that's one of my favorite, never doubt that a small, passionate, dedicated group of individuals can change the world. Because indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Paraphrasing Margaret Mead. Thank you all for tuning in today. I will try and do a show tomorrow, but I'm kind of in and out trying to recuperate still. But I will definitely be here. So I'm going to try to do 5 shows this week no matter what. But don't ever worry because I'm not going anywhere. I will never stop doing this. It's important to me that the truth gets out there. And I appreciate you all tuning in. Thank you for joining. Make sure you check out truthclothing.io. Get yourself a Question Everything t-shirt if you'd like to help support this channel. Check us out on Patreon/The Last American Vagabond. Just share the video. Be a part of all of this, the change that we're trying to create. I love all of you. Stay safe. And as always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.